Elon Musk leaned back in his chair, the soft hum of jazz music blending with the clink of glasses at the private lounge. Around him, an assortment of influential friends laughed, their banter weaving between stock tips and global ambitions. Yet, Elon's mind was elsewhere. He swirled the wine in his glass, gazing at the rich red hues, but tasting nothing. "You know what your problem is," Elon teased Derek Monroe, a brash venture capitalist with a penchant for stirring the pot. "You've become predictable." "Predictable?" Elon raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Careful, Derek. You're treading on thin ice." "No." "Seriously," Derek pressed on, his grin wide and conspiratorial. "Where's the risk-taker who built rockets and revolutionized transportation? When was the last time you did something truly outrageous? Like, oh, I don't know, marrying a waitress from McDonald's on a whim?" The table erupted in laughter, but Elon's eyes sparkled with intrigue. "Is that a dare?" he asked, his tone light but with an edge of challenge. Derek leaned in, his smile widening. "You wouldn't. Watch me." A few hours later, Elon sat behind the wheel of his sleek electric roadster, cruising aimlessly through the city. The quiet hum of the motor gave him space to think. He wasn't sure why Derek's words lingered, but they did. Maybe it was the monotony of his carefully curated life. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe, just maybe, he was tired of everything being so perfectly calculated. Hunger gnawed at him, and a glowing yellow arch beckoned from the side of the road. Pulling into the drive-thru, he decided to indulge in a guilty pleasure, a double cheeseburger and fries. Inside, Charlotte Evans moved with practiced efficiency, balancing trays and dodging impatient customers. Her uniform was clean but well-worn, her face betraying a tiredness that no amount of coffee could mask. Yet, when she smiled at a child in the corner booth, it was genuine, a rare moment of warmth in her grueling day. Elon stepped inside, the smell of fryer oil and salt mingling with the buzz of fluorescent lights. She didn't notice him at first. He was just another customer in the late-night crowd. But when their eyes met, something shifted. Her emerald green gaze held a mix of curiosity and wariness, as if she could sense that this man didn't belong here. "Can I take your order?" she asked, her voice polite but detached. Elon studied her, intrigued. "What's your name?" he asked, ignoring the menu entirely. "Charlotte," she replied, her brows knitting together. "Why, Charlotte?" he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "Will you marry me?" She blinked, the absurdity of the question hitting her like a slap. "Excuse me? You heard me?" His tone was matter-of-fact, as though he were proposing a business deal. For a moment, Charlotte thought she was being pranked. She scanned the room, half expecting a hidden camera crew. But the man before her wasn't laughing. He was serious. "Look, I don't know who you are or what kind of joke this is, but Elon Musk," he interrupted, extending a hand as if introducing himself at a cocktail party. Her jaw dropped. "The Elon Musk? The one and only?" She laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "Okay, this has to be a joke. Why on earth would you want to marry someone you just met? Someone like me?" "Why not?" he countered, his smirk returning. "Life's too short to overthink things. Say yes, and I promise, you won't regret it." Charlotte hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to walk away. But another voice, quieter but insistent, reminded her of her mother at home, sick and in need of constant care, of the bills piling up, of the endless nights working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. Could this be her way out? "You're crazy," she finally said, shaking her head. "Absolutely insane." "And yet," Elon said, leaning forward, "you're still considering it?" Against all reason, she found herself nodding. "Fine. Yes, The word hung between them. Impossibly surreal. Elon grinned, pulling out his phone. Great. Let's make it official. Charlotte had no idea what she'd just signed up for. But as Elon made a call, instructing someone to prepare a private jet, she realized her life would never be the same. Charlotte stood frozen in the middle of a grandiose dressing room, surrounded by mirrors that reflected her from every angle. Her fingers nervously smoothed the fabric of the gown draped over her body, a custom-made masterpiece from one of Paris's most exclusive designers. The dress fit perfectly, its intricate lace shimmering under the soft glow of chandelier lights. Yet, Charlotte felt like an imposter, a stranger in her own skin. Lift your chin, darling, cooed a stylist, adjusting the delicate diamond necklace that now adorned her neck. You're about to marry the most powerful man in the world. Smile like you mean it. Charlotte's lips twitched into a weak imitation of a grin, but her thoughts were far from celebratory. How had her life spiraled into this whirlwind of absurdity? Barely 48 hours had passed since she stood behind a greasy counter at McDonald's, balancing trays of fries, and now she was the center of an international media frenzy. Through the arched windows of the sprawling estate, she caught glimpses of the crowd gathered for the ceremony. There were movie stars, tech moguls, and political leaders, faces she'd only ever seen on TV. Somewhere out there, Elon was likely charming the pants off them, as effortlessly as he had convinced her to say yes. "Are you ready?" asked a gentle voice, pulling Charlotte from her spiraling thoughts. It was Claire, one of Elon's assistants, who had been assigned to help her navigate the chaos. Charlotte looked at Claire, her wide green eyes brimming with uncertainty. "I don't think I can do this." Claire gave her a sympathetic smile. "It's normal to feel overwhelmed, but you're marrying Elon Musk. You must see something in him, right?" Charlotte hesitated. Did she? She thought back to their bizarre encounter. There had been something in his gaze, a spark of genuine intrigue, of amusement that wasn't condescending, and his confidence had been infectious, pulling her into his orbit before she even knew what was happening. But love? That felt like a stretch. Before she could answer, the doors to the dressing room opened, revealing a tall man in a tailored suit. "Elon, can I have a moment with her?" he asked the room. The stylists and assistants exchanged glances before hurriedly shuffling out. Leaving the two of them alone, Elon stepped closer, his sharp eyes scanning her face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than she expected. "I don't belong here," Charlotte blurted out, her hands clutching the folds of her gown. This isn't me. Look at all these people. They're here for you. Not me. You're not just anything." Elon interrupted, his tone firm but kind. "You're extraordinary, Charlotte. I saw it the moment I met you." She laughed bitterly. "You don't even know me." "I want to," he said simply, his sincerity disarming. "Look, I know this is insane. Believe me, I don't do things like this either. But there's something about you, something real, and that's rare in my world." His words hung in the air, a fragile thread pulling her back from the edge of panic. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe him, to imagine that this wasn't just some elaborate game. "Elon," she began, her voice trembling, "what if I mess everything up?" "You won't," he said, reaching for her hands. His touch was warm, grounding. "But even if you do, who cares? Life's messy. That's what makes it interesting." Charlotte wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream all at once. Instead, she nodded. "Okay, let's do this." The ceremony was nothing short of a spectacle. Rows of white roses lined the aisle, their scent heavy in the warm afternoon air. Drones buzzed overhead, broadcasting the event to millions of viewers around the globe. Charlotte walked toward Elon, her steps slow and hesitant, feeling the weight of every eye on her. When she reached him, he smiled a genuine, almost boyish grin that made her heart skip despite her reservations. The officiant spoke, the words blending into a blur until it was her turn to respond. "I do," she whispered, her voice barely audible but steady. Elon squeezed her hand, his grip reassuring. "I do," he echoed, his voice clear and confident. The crowd erupted into applause, cameras flashing like fireworks. Charlotte forced a smile as Elon leaned in to kiss her, their lips meeting in a moment that felt both surreal and oddly comforting. Later, at the reception, the glitz and glamour were dialed up to 11. A-list celebrities mingled over champagne, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Charlotte sat at a lavish table, a glass of untouched wine in her hand, feeling more like an observer than a participant. Elon approached her, his tie slightly loosened, and held out a hand. "Dance with me." She hesitated but relented, letting him lead her to the dance floor. As they swayed to a soft melody, he leaned in close. "I know this is overwhelming," he murmured, "but I mean it when I say you're incredible, and I'm going to prove it to you." For the first time that day, Charlotte felt a flicker of something other than doubt, hope, maybe, or curiosity. She wasn't sure yet, but as Elon twirled her under the glow of crystal chandeliers, she couldn't deny that her life had changed forever, and she wasn't sure whether that thrilled or terrified her. The sprawling mansion in Bel Air was a marvel of modern architecture, glass walls, minimalist design, and sweeping views of Los Angeles. It should have felt like home, but to Charlotte, it felt more like a gilded cage. She wandered through the cavernous hallways, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the plush carpets. Everywhere she turned, there were reminders of Elon's world, cutting-edge gadgets, abstract art worth more than she could fathom, and staff members who treated her with a strange mix of reverence and distance. Charlotte sat at the marble kitchen island, absently stirring a cup of tea. The chef, a stoic man with a French accent, had offered to make her a gourmet breakfast, but she declined. She missed the simplicity of her old life, the smell of cheap coffee, the chatter of coworkers, and the satisfaction of small, hard-earned comforts. Her thoughts were interrupted by Elon's voice, crisp and commanding, echoing from the next room. He was on a video call, discussing a new project that sounded both revolutionary and incomprehensible. She caught snippets, something about neural interfaces and AI ethics. It was impressive, certainly, but it also underscored how far removed his life was from hers. By the time Elon joined her in the kitchen, he was already absorbed in his phone, his thumbs flying over the screen. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Morning," Charlotte replied, her tone flat. Elon finally glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "You okay?" She hesitated, debating whether to voice the thoughts swirling in her mind. "Do you ever stop?" she asked finally. He raised an eyebrow. "Stop what?" "This," she said, gesturing broadly. "The work, the calls, everything. Do you ever just sit still and—" "I don't know, B." Elon chuckled, though it lacked warmth. "I wouldn't know what to do with myself." "Why?" Charlotte shrugged, her gaze dropping to her tea. "It just feels like there's no room for anything else. For us." Elon frowned, but said nothing, his phone buzzing with a new notification. He glanced at it briefly before shoving it into his pocket. "I get it," he said, leaning against the counter. "This is all new for you. It'll take time to adjust." Adjust. The word grated on her. It wasn't just about adjustment. It was about feeling out of place in a world where she didn't belong. The tension reached a boiling point 2 weeks later at an elite gala in Silicon Valley. Charlotte, dressed in a gown that cost more than her old annual salary, stood by Elon's side as they navigated the glittering crowd. She forced polite smiles and endured introductions to people whose names she'd already forgotten. But it was during the dinner that everything unraveled. As she excused herself to find the restroom, she overheard a group of guests speaking in hushed tones at a nearby table. "Did you hear how they met?" one woman whispered, her tone dripping with amusement. "At a McDonald's. Of all places. Can you imagine?" Another laughed. "It's like a modern-day Cinderella story, except the prince married her on a dare." Charlotte froze, her heart sinking as their laughter grew louder. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. Was that how everyone saw her? A charity case? A joke? When she returned to the table, Elon was mid-conversation with another tech magnate. Oblivious to her turmoil, she sat in silence, her appetite gone, and waited for the night to end. Back at the mansion, she confronted him in the study. Elon was seated at his desk, scrolling through his emails, when Charlotte stormed in. "Do you even understand how humiliating tonight was for me?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. Elon looked up, startled. "What are you talking about?" "I overheard people mocking me, calling me the McDonald's bride, laughing about how we met. Do you have any idea how that feels?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Charlotte, those people don't matter. They don't matter," she cut him off, her voice rising. "Then why do you surround yourself with them? Why do you let them belittle me while you stand there doing nothing?" Elon's expression hardened. "You're overreacting. People gossip, it's what they do. Ignore it." Charlotte's chest tightened, her frustration boiling over. "You don't get it. You've never had to prove yourself the way I have. You've always been the genius, the visionary. You don't know what it's like to be seen as less than. I married you, didn't I?" he shot back, his voice sharp. "What more do you want?" The words hit her like a slap. She stared at him, her anger giving way to a deep, aching hurt. "I want to feel like I matter to you. Like this isn't just some experiment." For a moment, Elon said nothing, his jaw tightening. Finally, he looked away. "I don't have time for this right now." Charlotte felt the tears sting her eyes as she turned and walked out of the room. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay. Not like this. The mansion was eerily quiet that night, save for the faint hum of the central air system. Charlotte lay awake in the guest bedroom she'd retreated to after her argument with Elon, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts churned with doubt and frustration, the echoes of their fight playing over and over in her mind. The next morning, she decided to clear her head. Wandering through the house, she stumbled into Elon's home office, a stark, high-tech space filled with monitors, holographic displays, and papers scattered across a polished glass desk. Normally, she wouldn't intrude, but curiosity got the better of her. Maybe if she could understand his world a little more, she could find a way to bridge the growing chasm between them. She approached his desk, her eyes scanning the surface. Amid the chaos of blueprints and handwritten notes, his laptop sat open, its screen dim. When she tapped the touchpad, the screen lit up, revealing an email thread. The subject line caught her attention immediately. "Dare accepted." Charlotte's breath hitched. She hesitated, her heart pounding as she debated whether to click. But the temptation proved too strong. With trembling fingers, she opened the thread. The emails were a punch to the gut. The first one was from Derek Monroe, the friend who had joked about Elon marrying a waitress. "Elon, you've got to admit it would be hilarious. You settling down with someone from McDonald's? I bet you wouldn't last 6 months." Elon's reply followed. "Careful, Derek. You might lose that bet." Other messages followed. Banter between Elon and his inner circle, filled with smug amusement and disbelief that he was actually going through with it. As Charlotte scrolled, Tears blurred her vision. The thread painted a picture that was unmistakable. Their marriage had started as nothing more than a game, a challenge to prove Elon's fearlessness. She closed the laptop, her stomach churning. The man who had swept her into a world of unimaginable luxury had done so on a whim. Not out of love or even curiosity, but out of sheer arrogance. Charlotte didn't wait to confront him. She found him in the greenhouse, carefully inspecting a vertical hydroponic system that he'd had installed to experiment with sustainable farming techniques. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep either? She held his gaze, her face pale and tense. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon straightened, his expression shifting to one of confusion. "Know what?" "About the dare." Her words cut through the air like a blade. "About how this whole marriage started as some stupid joke between you and your friends." Elon froze, his eyes widening. "Charlotte, I don't," she snapped, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare try to spin this. I read the emails. Elon, all of it." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, yes. It started as a dare, but it's not what you think." Charlotte laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Not what I think. So, what is it then? You married me on a whim, dragged me into your insane world. And now what? You expect me to just be okay with this?" Elon stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "At first, yes, it was a dare. I won't lie to you about that. But everything changed. You changed me." "Stop," she said, holding up a hand. "Just stop. I believed you when you said you saw something in me. I thought maybe this was real. But it was all a joke to you." "It wasn't," Elon insisted, his voice cracking. "Not anymore." "Charlotte, I know," she interrupted, her voice firm despite her trembling. "I'm done being the punchline of your life." She turned on her heel and walked away, ignoring his calls for her to stop. Her vision blurred as she made her way to the guest room, grabbed her essentials, and slipped out of the house. The cool night air hit her like a wake-up call as she stood on the driveway, waiting for the rideshare car she'd hastily summoned. When the car pulled up, she got in without a second glance at the mansion behind her. For the first time in weeks, Charlotte found herself back in a world she recognized. The modest apartment she managed to rent was small but felt safe. She unpacked her few belongings slowly, trying to piece herself back together as she settled into a quieter, simpler existence. Elon's texts and calls came frequently at first, then sporadically, until they stopped altogether. Charlotte blocked his number, needing space to heal, but the wounds he'd left weren't so easily ignored. Rain pounded against the windows of Charlotte's modest apartment, the rhythmic tapping both soothing and oppressive. She sat curled up on the small couch, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, sipping tea from a chipped mug. Her life was quieter now, stripped of the luxury and chaos that had come with being Elon Musk's wife. Yet, even in this newfound simplicity, her mind wandered back to him. Late at night, when the world was still, she would remember his laugh, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his wildest ideas. But then the memory of the email thread would resurface, twisting the fondness into a sharp pang of betrayal. The knock on her door startled her. It was sharp and insistent, cutting through the rainstorm outside. She set her mug down, her heart leaping to her throat. Few people knew where she lived. Rising slowly, she approached the door and peered through the peephole. Elon, he stood there, drenched from head to toe, rainwater dripping from his tousled hair onto the stoop. His suit, though custom-tailored, clung to him awkwardly in the downpour. He looked desperate. Charlotte hesitated before opening the door a crack. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low and wary. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion and urgency. "Please, let me in." She stared at him, unsure whether to slam the door or let him speak. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. "You're soaked. Take off your coat," she said. Her tone clipped as she handed him a towel from the bathroom. He nodded, shrugging off the soaked garment and drying himself awkwardly. "Thanks," he muttered, his usual confidence conspicuously absent. "What do you want, Elon?" Charlotte asked, crossing her arms and leaning against the wall. "If it's another excuse or justification, I'm not interested." Elon met her gaze, his eyes dark with emotion. "I don't have an excuse," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I messed up, Charlotte. I lied to you. I hurt you. And I lost you. But I can't do this without you," she scoffed, shaking her head. "Do what, Elon? Run your billion-dollar empire? Marry someone else on a dare? What exactly do you need me for?" "I don't need you for anything," he said quickly. "I want you. You're the only person who's ever made me feel like more than just a name, a brand, a genius. When I'm with you, I'm just Elon, and that scares the hell out of me. But it's also the only time I feel alive." His words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. Charlotte's defenses wavered, but the anger still burned. "You don't get to say things like that after what you did," she said, her voice cracking. "You humiliated me, Elon. You turned my life into a spectacle, a joke." He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said softly, "but I'm not leaving until you hear me out." She wanted to tell him to go, to slam the door and shut him out for good, but the rain-soaked vulnerability in his eyes stopped her. "Fine," she said, her tone icy. "Talk." For the next hour, Elon laid bare his soul in a way Charlotte had never seen before. He admitted his flaws, his arrogance, his inability to connect, his fear of vulnerability. He spoke about the emptiness of his success, the loneliness that no amount of money or innovation could fill. "I thought I was untouchable," he said, his voice trembling, "that nothing could shake me. Then I met you, and for the first time, I realized how much I had to lose." Charlotte listened, her arms wrapped around herself as she processed his words. Part of her wanted to believe him, to trust the raw emotion in his voice. But trust was a fragile thing, and Elon had shattered hers. When he finished, silence filled the room, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the windows. Elon looked at her, his expression a mix of hope and resignation. "I love you, Charlotte," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Her breath caught. She had longed to hear those words, but now that they were spoken, they felt bittersweet. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight," he said. "I just want a chance to prove that I'm serious, that you mean everything to me." Charlotte stared at him, her mind a storm of conflicting emotions, anger and longing, betrayal and love. Before she could stop herself, she leaned in and kissed him. The kiss was electric, charged with months of tension and unspoken feelings. Elon pulled her closer, his hands cradling her face as if afraid she might disappear. For a moment, the world outside faded, leaving only the two of them, connected in a way that felt both impossible and inevitable. When they finally pulled apart, Charlotte's chest heaved as she struggled to catch her breath. "This doesn't mean everything's okay," she said, her voice trembling. "I know," Elon said, his forehead resting against hers. "But it's a start." The morning light filtered through Charlotte's apartment window, bathing the room in soft hues of gold. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the small white stick in her trembling hands. The two faint pink lines stared back at her, unyielding in their message. Pregnant. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she tried to process the news. A whirlwind of emotions surged through her: shock, fear, uncertainty, and, buried beneath it all, a flicker of warmth. She hadn't planned for this. Not now. Not with everything so unsettled. Her mind raced. What would Elon say? Would he see this as a burden, a complication in his meticulously engineered life? Or would he see it as something more, a chance to build something real between them? Charlotte placed the test on the nightstand, pressing her hands to her face. She hadn't spoken to Elon since their emotional night together. Part of her had needed time to think, to figure out whether his words had been genuine or another layer of his intricate charm. And now this. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen and saw his name, Elon. She hesitated before answering, her voice quiet and wary. "Hello, Charlotte," he said, relief flooding his tone. "I wasn't sure if you'd pick up. What do you want?" "Elon," she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know I said I'd give you space," he began, his voice filled with a rare vulnerability. "But I can't stop thinking about you, about us." Charlotte closed her eyes, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "Elon, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. "What is it?" he asked, his tone immediately serious. She hesitated. The words caught in her throat, but before she could answer, a voice on his end interrupted, a hurried assistant reminding him of an upcoming meeting. "I'll call you back," Elon said quickly, clearly torn. "I promise." He hung up before she could say anything more. Charlotte stared at the phone, her stomach churning with frustration and anxiety. Days passed, and Charlotte avoided the calls that followed. She wasn't ready, not until she could sort out how she felt about everything. But one evening, as she was scrolling through social media, a headline caught her eye. Elon Musk speaks out on personal regrets in heartfelt interview. Intrigued, she clicked on the link, and a video began to play. Elon sat in a sleek studio, his expression somber as he spoke to a well-known journalist. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've been so focused on chasing the next big thing that I forgot what really matters. And in the process, I hurt someone I care about deeply." Charlotte's breath caught as she watched him on the screen. "I let the best thing in my life walk away," he continued, "and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. If she's watching this, I'm sorry, truly." The sincerity in his voice struck a chord deep within her. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps Elon's feelings for her weren't just a fleeting infatuation. The next day, Charlotte took a deep breath and called him. He answered on the first ring. "Charlotte," he said, his voice filled with relief. "I saw the interview," she said, her voice soft. "I meant every word," Elon said, his tone earnest. "I want to fix this. I want to be better for you. There's something you should know," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant." The line went silent. For a moment, Charlotte feared the worst. "Pregnant," he finally said, his voice a mix of shock and wonder. "Yes," she said, tears threatening to spill. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you, but you deserve to know." Elon exhaled shakily. "Our child," she nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Yes, Charlotte," he said, his voice breaking. I don't know what to say, but I do know one thing: I want to be there. For everything. For you. For them." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she listened to the raw emotion in his voice. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The retreat was nestled deep within the Colorado Rockies, a secluded haven far from prying eyes and the noise of the world. Elon had chosen it carefully, wanting a place where he and Charlotte could reconnect without distractions. The rustic cabin, though small by his standards, was cozy and inviting, with its roaring stone fireplace and sweeping views of snow-dusted peaks. Charlotte stepped out of the car, her breath visible in the crisp mountain air. She clutched her coat tighter around her. Glancing at Elon, his expression was tentative, as if he feared she might turn around and leave at any moment. "This is beautiful," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I thought you might like it," he replied, his voice equally quiet. They moved inside, where Elon fussed with the fireplace, coaxing the flames to life. Charlotte settled onto the plush couch, her hands cradling a warm mug of cocoa he'd prepared. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but charged, filled with unspoken words and emotions waiting to surface. "Elon," she began, breaking the stillness. "Why are you doing this?" He turned to her, his expression serious. "Because I want to make this work. Not just for the baby, but for us." Charlotte searched his face, looking for any sign of the dismissive arrogance she had grown so wary of. Instead, she saw vulnerability, the walls he usually kept so carefully constructed beginning to crumble. "I don't know if we can go back to how things were," she said honestly. "I don't want to go back," he admitted, sitting beside her. "I want to move forward together over the next few days." They fell into a quiet rhythm. They cooked simple meals together, hiked through the snowy trails, and talked late into the night. For the first time, Charlotte began to see Elon not as the billionaire or the innovator, but as a man trying to atone for his mistakes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elon led her to a small outdoor deck. A candlelit table awaited them, a bottle of sparkling cider chilling beside it. "What's this?" Charlotte asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I thought we could celebrate," Elon said, pulling out a chair for her. "Celebrate what?" she asked as she sat at you. He said simply, sitting across from her. "For giving me another chance. For putting up with me," Charlotte chuckled, her heart warming despite herself. They ate slowly, the conversation flowing easily. Elon listened intently as she talked about her dreams, her fears about the pregnancy, and the things she missed from her old life. "You've taught me so much," Elon said as the stars began to appear above them, "about resilience, kindness, and what really matters. I don't know how I got so lucky, but I'm not going to waste it." Charlotte's eyes softened as she met his gaze. "You've got a long way to go before I completely trust you again," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "I know," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you can." Later that night, under the warmth of the cabin's firelight, they sat together on the couch. Elon leaned closer, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low. Charlotte's heart fluttered, her breath catching. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. When his lips met hers, it was different from before. There was no pretense, no performance, just raw emotion. The kiss deepened, igniting a passion that had been smoldering beneath the surface for months. They moved slowly, rediscovering each other in a way that felt new and profound. For the first time, Charlotte felt not like a stranger in Elon's world, but like a partner, an equal, as they lay tangled together on the couch, their breathing steady and content. Elon pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "I love you," he murmured, the words carrying a weight they hadn't before. Charlotte smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "I love you too," she whispered, allowing herself to believe it. The news broke quietly at first, just a single article on a niche business site. Elon Musk steps back from day-to-day operations of Tesla and SpaceX. By the end of the week, it was front-page news across the globe. Analysts speculated, shareholders fretted, and critics questioned whether Elon was losing his edge. But for Elon, the decision wasn't about strategy or perception. It was about family. He made the announcement to Charlotte one morning as they sat on the porch of their Colorado retreat, watching the sun rise over the snow-capped peaks. Charlotte cradled a mug of tea, her belly beginning to show the soft curve of her pregnancy. "I'm delegating the operational reins," Elon said, his voice casual but steady. Charlotte looked at him, startled. "You're what?" "I'm stepping back," he repeated, turning to meet her gaze. "Not completely. I'll still be involved in the big decisions. But the day-to-day? The constant grind? I can't keep living like that and be the partner and father I want to be." Her brow furrowed as she processed his words. "Elon, are you sure? Those companies are your life's work. They're part of my life's work," he corrected gently, reaching for her hand. "But you and this baby? You're my life now." Charlotte felt a lump rise in her throat. She'd always known Elon was a man driven by his ambitions, his endless pursuit of progress. For him to step back, even partially, was no small gesture. It was a sacrifice. "I don't want you to give up everything for me," she said quietly. "I'm not giving up anything," he replied. "I'm choosing what matters most." The weeks that followed marked a shift in their lives. Elon threw himself into their relationship and the preparations for their child with the same intensity he once reserved for his companies. He attended doctor's appointments, read parenting books, and even began designing a state-of-the-art crib equipped with sensors to monitor the baby's health. But it wasn't just his role as a father-to-be that evolved. Inspired by Charlotte's background and struggles, Elon turned his attention to causes he had once overlooked. He began funding programs for working-class families, supporting affordable childcare initiatives, and investing in community development projects. One day, he presented Charlotte with a proposal for a foundation they could run together. "You've seen things I never have," he told her. "You know what it's like to struggle in ways I can't fully understand. I want to use our resources to make a real difference. And I want you to lead it with me." Charlotte was overwhelmed, but also deeply moved. "Are you sure?" she asked. "This isn't my world. I'm not some philanthropist or CEO." "No," he said with a small smile. "You're better. You're real. And that's exactly what we need." The foundation launched a few months later. Its mission focused on providing support for families in need. Charlotte found new purpose in her work, connecting with communities and using her platform to amplify their voices. Meanwhile, Elon found himself learning from her in ways he hadn't expected. He accompanied her on visits to schools and shelters, meeting people who faced challenges he could hardly imagine. Each interaction left him more determined to use his wealth and influence for meaningful change. One evening, after a particularly moving day spent visiting a struggling rural town, Charlotte and Elon sat together in their kitchen, sharing a quiet moment. "I never thought this would be my life," Charlotte admitted, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. "Neither did I," Elon replied, his hand resting gently on hers. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything." As she looked into his eyes, she realized he meant it. The man she had once seen as untouchable and driven to the point of obsession had softened in ways she hadn't thought possible. He was still Elon Musk, brilliant, relentless, and occasionally infuriating. But he was also a man who had learned to value love and connection over ambition. By the time their baby arrived, their bond was stronger than ever. They named the child Luna, a nod to both Elon's love of space and Charlotte's grounding presence in his life. As they held Luna together in the quiet of the hospital room, Elon leaned down to kiss Charlotte's forehead. "You've given me more than I ever deserved," he whispered. Charlotte smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "And you've given me a life I never dreamed of." A gentle breeze swept through the garden of their home in Texas, carrying the scent of roses and jasmine. A small, intimate group of friends and family gathered under the twinkling fairy lights, their faces glowing with joy. The occasion? Elon and Charlotte were renewing their vows, 1 year after the birth of their daughter, Luna. Unlike the grand spectacle of their first wedding, this ceremony was deeply personal. The guest list was small, the decorations simple, and the atmosphere filled with genuine warmth. Luna, dressed in a tiny white dress with a flower crown, gurgled happily in Charlotte's arms as the ceremony began. Elon stood at the altar, his eyes never leaving Charlotte as she approached him. She wore a flowing ivory dress, her hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. She looked radiant, confident, and at ease in a way she hadn't at their first wedding. When she reached him, he took her free hand, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "You're breathtaking," he whispered. Charlotte smiled. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The officiant smiled as the ceremony began. But it wasn't the traditional vows that brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. It was the couple's heartfelt words to each other. Elon spoke first, his voice steady but brimming with emotion. "Charlotte, the first time I asked you to marry me, it was impulsive, reckless, and, in hindsight, selfish. I didn't know then what I know now, that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. You taught me how to see the world beyond my own ambitions, how to love without reservation, and how to be a better man. No more dares, no more games, just my love for you and the life we're building together." Charlotte's eyes glistened with tears as she squeezed his hand. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath. "Elon, when I said yes to you that night, I was scared and uncertain, and honestly, I thought I might be making the biggest mistake of my life. But every step of this journey has shown me that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the greatest joys. You've proven to me that love isn't about perfection, it's about commitment, growth, and showing up every day. I trust you now in a way I never thought I could. You're my home, and I'm so grateful for you." After the vows, they shared a kiss that brought cheers and applause from the guests. As the evening wore on, laughter and music filled the air. Luna toddled around the garden, giggling as she was scooped up by family members. At one point, Charlotte stood at the edge of the garden, watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of orange and pink. Elon joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" she asked, leaning into his embrace. "Every day," he said, his voice soft. "And I wouldn't change a thing, not even the messy parts." Charlotte chuckled. "There were a lot of messy parts, and they made us who we are," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. As they stood together, watching the stars begin to emerge, Charlotte felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. Their journey had been far from conventional, but it was theirs a story of redemption, resilience, and love that refused to be defined by the odds. Later that night, after the guests had left and Luna was asleep in her crib, Elon and Charlotte sat by the fireplace, sharing a quiet moment. "What's next for us?" Charlotte asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "Anything we want," Elon replied, a smile playing at his lips. "As long as we're together." Charlotte looked up at him, her heart full. "Then I'd say we've already won." Elon nodded, his expression content. For once in his life, he wasn't thinking about the future or the next big project. He was simply here, present and grateful. with the woman he loved and the family they had built. And that was more than enough.